In this movie, we're going to blend in a second translucent gradient using a couple of carefully placed opacity values in order to establish the boundaries of the Earth. And I want to retrieve that compound path that represents the Earth, so I'll go ahead and twirl open my gradients layer here inside the Layers panel, and I'll turn on that compound path so that I can see it. I also need to be able to see my guides, so I'll turn them on, and I'm going to select that guides layer as well. Now, at this point, you're going to have to sort of bear with me. What I want to do is establish a circular guide that we'll use in order to draw this second radial gradient. And I want it to be the size of that original Earth, the one that was rounded in opposition of Saturn that we created back in the previous chapter. And I didn't keep that big circle, so I'm going to have to recreate it. And I'm going to do so by switching to the ellipse tool, which I can select from the Shape Tool flyout menu. And then I'll go ahead and position my cursor right there at the center of that rectangle, the bottom of the exhaust plume. And then I'll Alt-click or Option-click on the Mac to bring up the ellipse dialog box. And then, assuming that you're seeing two equal values right here for width and height, then go ahead and turn on your link icon and set either the width or the height value to 1,000 points. And then click OK, and you'll create this enormous circle like so. Then remember that we scooted it down and to the left. And you can do that by pressing the V key to switch back to the black arrow tool, and then press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac to bring up the Move dialog box. And these are the exact values we want: an angle of negative 120 degrees and a distance of 280 points. You don't need to worry about the horizontal and vertical values. They'll reconcile automatically. And then go ahead and click OK to accept that change like so. Now, with this object on the Guides layer, go up to the View menu, choose Guides, and then choose Make Guides in order to turn that circle into a guide. All right, now what we want to do is select the Earth, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit as well. And we want to fill it with a gradient, so I'll just go ahead and click on the gradient slider this time around. Notice that the fill is active. That's very important. And we want to change the type once again to radial. And now I'm going to select the gradient tool, which you can get by pressing the G key. And you want to drag from this center point all the way up to, let's say, right about there. And I have to eyeball things a little bit this time so that it's more or less aligned to the outer perimeter of the circle. Notice that my angle value this time is 60.3 degrees. I want it to be exactly 60 degrees. So I'll go ahead and change that value. And I want the color to be white. So I'm going to double click on this first color stop, and I'll just change it to an HSB white, which can be any hue value. It really doesn't matter, but I am going to change it to 210 degrees. The saturation does need to be 0, and the brightness needs to be 100%. And then you can go ahead and create a copy of that color by Alt or Option dragging the color stop. And now we can get rid of black because we don't want it, just by dragging it downward like so. And the result is a white to white gradient, which of course doesn't make any sense, but it will in just a moment. Now I'm going to start by changing this second location value to 88%. Again, easy to enter and memorable as well. It's the kind of thing that somebody can easily reproduce after you. And then I'll select that first color stop and I'll change it to 77%. Now, all of this only makes sense if we introduce some opacity variation. So I'm going to change the opacity of the first color stop to 0% here inside the gradient panel. And you can now see that we have a gradient that's going from 0% opacity at this location right there to 100% opacity at this location. And I can change that, by the way. I don't want it to be 100%. So I'll go ahead and double click on this second color stop, the one that has a location of 88%, in order to bring up this panel here inside the document window, at which point I can change the opacity value to 50% to make it a little bit lighter. And then I'll press the Enter key or the Return key on a Mac to make that change. All right, now I'm going to zoom in. And at this point, I experimented with where this end point should be. And I found that if I dragged it too far, like, for example, right about here, I lost that little bit of brightness that I want. And then if I don't drag it far enough, of course, we have too much brightness. It's a little bit garish, and it gets flat right in these corners, this corner here on the right side, as well as the corner on the left side. So I ended up taking this guy up to the bottom of this rectangular guide, which is about the point at which the wings dissolve into the body of the rocket. And you want to make sure, by the way, after you get done making your modification, that the angle value is still 60 degrees. So that's very important. And assuming that it is, you can just go ahead and press the V key to switch back to the black arrow tool and then click off of that path outline to deselect it, and then finally descend to the guides layer here inside the layers panel and turn it off so that we have an uninterrupted view of our logo. And that's how you indicate the boundaries of a logo element, by blending one gradient with another using a couple of carefully placed opacity values here inside Illustrator.